module number 7, the place of dialogue. Now, as I say, if we're presenting this over a whole day of 8 hours, then we break it up with lots of little interactive exercises to help people remember things and engage them. And one thing I ask them is, I say, look at this cartoon and tell me what the problem with communication is in it. And this is a Gary Larson cartoon. So here we have an example of cross-species communication and a man talking to a dog. Okay, Ginger, I've had it. You stay out of the garbage. Understand, Ginger, stay out of the garbage or else. What we say to dogs. And then the second one is what they hear. Blah, blah, Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 blah. So I say to people, what's the problem with this communication? And you get all sorts of answers to this, but generally people will say, well, he's from a different species, he doesn't understand what's being said, or he doesn't speak the guy's language, and so on, and those are natural answers. But I say, no, none of those are actually correct. The problem in communication here is that this man is using some words that are not in the dog's vocabulary. Some words that are not in the dog's vocabulary. Because the dog certainly does understand at least some English. He knows his own name, Ginger, which is why he's looking so alertly at his master. So I then say, well, do we ever do that in sharing the gospel? Do we ever use words that are not in people's vocabulary? And then I'll ask them to tell me the kind of words that we use, and they'll come back with the language of Zion words, like justification, sanctification, washed in the blood, propitiation, even words like sin and so on, or perhaps even Jesus, and simply make the point that we have to use words that people understand if we're going to communicate with them effectively. And if we look at the way the apostles did evangelism, and particularly their technique, now we've looked at the content, we've had a brief summary of the content of their messages, but actually what techniques did they use? And there are 3 key things we see in every apostolic interaction. The first one is this, that they always spoke in a language that people understood. And when they didn't, they got into trouble. So we see, for example, Paul in Athens speaking to the philosophers, and their response was, what is this babbler trying to say? And we read in Acts 17, it's because Jesus was telling them the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So 3 ideas there that they didn't know. Good news, euangelion, the Greek word, Jesus, Jesus, and resurrection, anastasis. These were 3 words that weren't in their vocabulary. And so Jesus, Paul on the way to the Areopagus is thinking, well, how can I communicate with these people? And he preaches a sermon, which is an absolute model of communication to people of a different worldview, because he explains every word they don't know. So we've got to use a language that people understand, words that make sense to them. So there we are, in a language they understand. What's the second thing? In an environment they feel comfortable. Very interesting, this. And you see the apostles will speak in different environments. So we see Paul speaking in the synagogue, we see him speaking to Jews, we see him speaking in the street of the Areopagus, we see him speaking in the street to farmers at Lystra and Derbe in Acts 16. We see him speaking in his own rented accommodation. We see him speaking in any environment where people feel comfortable, not where he felt comfortable, but where they did. So you've got to go to environments where people feel comfortable. If you want to speak to Muslims, then you go to the mosque or you go to neutral territory. If you want to speak to friends, you invite them around to your home. If you want to speak to university students, a university lecture theatre is a great place, but not your church, probably. That's not where they're going to feel comfortable. You might, but they don't. In a language they understand, in an environment they feel comfortable. What's the third one? With the opportunity for discussion. And then I will walk people through. I'll take a long time to do this normally, and we have to do it very quickly with you. But I take them on a walk through Acts 17 to 19. And I point out that in every circumstance where evangelism took place, you see the Greek word dialegomai, from which comes our English word dialogue. It was in the context of two-way conversation, where there was opportunity for objections to be made, questions to be asked. It was a two-way discussion in an environment they understand, in a language they understand, in an environment they feel comfortable, and with the opportunity for discussion. That's how the apostles did it. And we have to be, I think, pretty foolish not to follow the way they do it. But usually, or often, the way we Christians do evangelism is we do it in a language people don't understand, because we use words that aren't in their vocabulary without explaining them. We try and get them into an environment where they feel very uncomfortable, and we do it without the opportunity for discussion. So there's a long talk, but without any opportunity to answer objections. And of course, then the speaker doesn't know whether people are understanding. It's one of the first things you learn as a doctor, that when you give bad news to a patient or tell them something difficult, you always ask them to feed back what they think they've understood, and you'll be amazed at how often they haven't understood, and you've got to go over it in more detail. That's how the apostles did it. Those three principles are what they followed. And the good thing about dialogue is it enables us, first of all, to check their understanding. You know, does that make sense to you? What do you understand I'm saying by this? Understand their objections. We'll come to that a bit later. And of course, as well, answer their questions. One of the closest things to this kind of evangelism today is Hyde Park Speaker's Corner in London, where you can go down and stand on a soapbox and give a talk. But people are coming along not to hear monologue sermons, but to engage in discussion and dialogue with people. This is the natural, apostolic, spirit-filled way of doing evangelism, in words they understand, in an environment they feel comfortable, and with the opportunity for discussion. And this, of course, raises the question, what are we afraid of? Which brings us to module 8, and then we'll stop for some questions after that.